So to kick off the day, Scott and I are going to talk about AI in manufacturing and what it means right now. Like, what are the things you can do right now with the AI capability that's out there? And we'll talk about how you can then use that as a competitive advantage for the long term. So I'm Eric Newell. I am the co-founder and CEO of Stoneridge Software. Before founding Stoneridge, I spent 13 years at Microsoft. I'm also the author of a book on how to implement Microsoft Dynamics technology called Mastering Microsoft Dynamics 365 Implementations. And with me today is Scott Frappier.
Yeah, Eric, pleasure to be on the call today. So I'll just do a quick introduction. My name is Scott Frappier. My role at Stoneridge is the Chief Software Architect. So really what that means is I get to know a lot about all the different Microsoft technologies and how we use those inside of the businesses that we support. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. I get to lead the pre-sales architects, and we've got a bi-weekly confab that we typically tackle just to share a lot of those technological news around Copilot, around different industries. And yeah, just really excited here today to kind of go into some more detail, obviously, of manufacturers and how we can actually use these technologies to accelerate automation in a manufacturing environment. So pleasure to be here with you, Eric, to kind of go through this topic.
Yeah, that's great, Scott. And if you haven't checked out Confab, so every other Thursday on LinkedIn, go to our Stoneridge software site, and it's kind of a free hour of technology showcase that I really encourage you to check out if you haven't done so already. All right, so what we're going to cover today during our keynote is kind of 5 key areas. First off, I'm going to talk a little bit about, is AI worth the hype? Where are we on the hype scale of AI? What is reality? What you should be thinking about, and how you can take advantage of it and use it. Then Scott's going to go and do some demonstrations. So first, he's going to talk about some of the native AI features for manufacturers. And then I'll talk about how to expand the AI capability into the Dataverse, or the Microsoft platform, business applications platform. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end about how to get started with Copilot. What are some things you can do to take advantage of it? Where do you start with it? And make sure that you have an idea of how to take that next step. And then Scott will finish it up with incorporating AI without even doing any programming. So some ways that you can use Copilot Studio to take advantage of that functionality without requiring a bunch of programming and a bunch of cost. And then finally, I'll give a quick overview of what's on tap for today in terms of the schedule for the day. All right, so with that, let's jump in. So AI, since ChatGPT kind of hit the world at the end of 2022, everyone's been talking about AI, and you've been hearing about companies hiring all these people to do AI, and Gartner and Forrester and all these places saying, AI is going to be a, $70 gazillion business over time. And so the hype train is kind of going crazy with AI right now. So what tends to happen when you have this technology trigger like this, like AI, is we've been at that peak of inflated expectations. So where everyone thinks that it can do everything. And then there comes this trough of disillusionment where everyone's kind of sick of talking about AI, and they're sick of hearing about all the things that it can do. And then it actually gets back up to a slope of enlightenment where you're starting to understand how to use it. And then you get to this plateau of productivity. So our goal today is to help you kind of skip through the whole ups and downs and get to that plateau of productivity. So understand what it is and what it isn't, and understand how you can use it to become more productive. Trying to cut through all the hype and just get to what it really is. So it's interesting to me what people think of AI is and what it isn't. So I think it's important to understand what we're talking about here with ChatGPT and Copilot and these types of technologies is generative AI. And so that's a specific type of AI where you would use a large language model to read all of the information on the internet or whatever data source you give it, and then make sense of and be able to give a conversational response back to a question that you ask of it. So that's really, at the end of the day, what this generative AI is. And one of the fascinating things about it is the creators of these generative AI tools like OpenAI and others, like they don't know what the answer is going to be when you ask the engine a question. So it is truly artificial intelligence, whereas in the past, a lot of AI conversations were really about pattern matching, where if you do this pattern a million times, it will tell you what the next thing to do is. This is truly like artificial intelligence where they don't know what the answer is going to be. So that's really the leap that we've made here over the past couple of years to generative AI. But I still hear people talking about, oh, this, you can solve this problem with AI, or this is AI, or whatever. So I just want to take one quick minute to explain what it is and what it isn't. So sometimes AI gets mistaken for programming. So I need to code, I need to do and build an integration between two different applications. I'll just have AI do it. Well, there's still thought and discovery and process documentation and a plan that you have to build around building an integration like that. You still have to get data from one site. You still have to import that data into a system. Now, AI can help you with all those steps, but AI just can't like magically do it. The same thing with like you're going to build a e-commerce platform for your organization. Oh, I'll just have AI do it. Well, that's kind of taking a too simplistic approach. Yes, AI can help you with it, but it can't just do all of those things. You still need to have a discovery, do requirements, come up with a plan in order to be able to pull those things off. And then another thing people think about with AI is like demand planning, and Scott will show an example a little bit later about that, but demand planning is something that's been around in AI for a while. And again, that is that pattern matching where you say, okay, I'm going to take the last 7 years of history and I'm going to use that to project what our sales orders are going to be over the next year. So that's a different type of AI. That's more of this pattern matching historical review kind of capability than what generative AI is. So that is AI, but it's an AI that's been around for a number of years as well. And then you get to generative AI, and some of the cool things that generative AI can do, and we've seen this happen with our clients, is like live translation during a conference call. We were talking to a prospect in Costa Rica, and one of our team members who spoke Spanish was communicating with them, and another who doesn't speak Spanish was able to follow along to the whole conversation with live transcription of what was going on. That's powered by generative AI. Having a chatbot on your website that can respond intelligently to questions, that's using generative AI. Being able to draft a PowerPoint based on some prompts, that's using this generative AI. Creating legal documents based on prompts, you can do that with generative AI. And you can make a huge dent in the programming that you would do using AI and getting started with generative AI. So those are all examples of where you can use generative AI and what power it brings to you. But one example I'd like to share is if you ask a question like, hey, AI, like, I want to buy a car. Well, just like any kind of programming or any kind of technology approach, if you give it a very high level question, it's not going to give you a very good answer. So if I say to Copilot or to ChatGPT, what kind of car should I buy? Well, here's the answer it gives me. Well, if you want an EV, here's some ideas. If you want hybrids, here's some ideas, compact car. This is the same kind of thing of like saying, oh, I want AI to build an e-commerce site for me. You got to give it more information than that. And if you do, you can get really good results. And so that's where this concept of a prompt comes in. And so this word prompt is kind of a new word in technology, not something that we've talked a little bit about. They now have things called prompt engineers, of people who all they do is come up with the right prompts to get the best information out of a large language model. But the prompt is really important, and that's where I would focus learning for your team. But the prompt is simple. It's just asking a question, but you want to ask intelligent questions, and then you want to refine those questions that you ask till you get the results that you're looking for. So for example, I said, I want to buy a vehicle that can haul a boat and that's electric, and it gets at least 320 miles of range, and I want it to be in black. What are my options and how much do they cost? So the first thing I get, and then from there I refine it to say, what is the price and the range of the different trim models, and then which of the cars are available near me? So after going through all of that, I get an example of 3 different electric cars here: a Chevy Silverado, a GMC Hummer, and a Rivian R1T. And these are the examples that it gives me now that I've asked a refined question. And then I also get links to where I can buy these cars from that prompt. So you just have to be more intelligent and more descriptive in the kind of questions that you ask to be able to get these kind of good results from a prompt and from the AI engine. And then another example I'll share with you. So I am not an engineer. I'm a French major and a business major who happens to be pretty good at technology. But the last thing I am is an engineer that can build a different kind of technology. So one of the things that I wanted to test using AI was, could I end up building a 5-gallon bucket? So I don't know how to build a 5-gallon bucket. I don't even know what materials go in a 5-gallon bucket. So I decided I'm going to use Copilot to start a bucket company, which I named the bucket company. And here's the logo that it came up with for me. But in order to figure out how to build this bucket, I actually asked Copilot a series of questions. So here's an example of the prompts that I asked Copilot to be able to get these answers. And you can see here, I asked, 12, 13 questions. And here's what I was able to get for an answer. So the bucket company, my 5-gallon plastic bucket project that I wanted to build, I asked, what materials does it use? High density polyethylene. I didn't know what that was, but that is what it should use. What should we use for the handle? Galvanized steel. Okay, that's good to know. So how much volume is needed? So one of the questions it actually asked me is, what should the thickness of the HDPE be? And so I said 3 millimeters. And so it said, well, you're going to need 2.1 pounds of HDPE to pull this off, and about 51 grams of galvanized steel. Then it said, and then I asked, how much does it cost? And so it'll be about $1.62 in material cost for me to build this. And then what could I sell this for? And it said, well, $6 to $9 is probably the right amount. So $6.99 is what I'm going with. And then what is the profit margin? About 76%. It also had some suggestions on how I do the mold for this bucket as well, too. So the whole experience to come up with this kind of information took about 10 minutes. And again, I have no experience. I have no idea how to make a 5-gallon bucket. But using this kind of technology, you have the ability to kind of produce these results in a very quick amount of time. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today was just how, as you look to the future, the kind of the difference between experience and those who can take advantage of new technologies. So one of the things I'm doing this semester is I'm actually teaching a college class about entrepreneurship. And one of the things I've found about these 20 and 21-year-olds that are in my class is they're really good at technology, and they are definitely embracing the power of AI. And so if you think about your experienced people who've been into the business for 30, 35 years, like they really know, they've tried a number of things, they really know what they're doing. But now you're looking at the possibility of 20 and 21-year-olds catching up to them really quickly. So as you think about it, like how long would it take for a college student to catch up to an experienced professional? Well, if I, a novice who knows nothing about 5-gallon buckets, can come up with a plan to build that within 10 minutes, like these college students and younger folks will be able to do that kind of thing. And so if you don't think about using AI, you have this real potential to be caught up or to be chased down by people who take advantage of it. So just one last thing that I wanted to share before we jump in with Scott, but just the power of AI is significant. And if you're not investing in it, you could easily be left behind. Now, it's not going to change the world dramatically, maybe in a month or maybe a year, but in 10 years, if you haven't taken advantage of this and incorporated this into how you're using your manufacturing process, how you're running your core business, how you're managing costs, how you're managing your people, you're going to lose out to the people that have done that already. So I think it's important for you to understand the gravity. So yes, there's a lot of hype around AI, but it really is a game-changing technology. And Scott's now going to show you a couple ways that you can see this in action and start to take advantage of it.
Absolutely, Eric, and you absolutely nailed it. It is absolutely something in terms of capabilities that if you don't know how to use it, you've got to start getting involved with it because it is going to change how we use automation in business. And for today, what we want to do is show some examples from a manufacturing perspective of how we would actually do that. So what I'm going to do just really quickly here is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And in my screen, what I'm going to do here in the background is I'm actually going to pull up Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we've got the screen kind of presented here as well. So 1 second as I go through and do that. And there we have now our F&O front and center here. So one of the things I wanted to start talking about is that when we look at AI enablement within an ERP system, you've heard of AI ERP. Really, what we're looking for at this point are the use cases that help automate and accelerate business processes. One of the themes that Eric and I have heard many times before has been that AI is a solution looking for a problem. And quite candidly, that's not entirely true. I think at the beginning, it was overhyped, as Eric has mentioned, but that reality was something at Stoneridge that we really focused on because we understand from a business perspective that you're not buying systems because they're a shiny new toy. You're buying them because they accelerate or they automate or they make something easier inside of your business environment. So just as an example with that, if we look at, for example, in finance and operations, one of the key features that we have inside of our environment is the ability for information to be summarized with what we call Copilot summarization. You'll hear it called summary by Copilot, but this is where large language models really shine. So if you think about customers, or you think about vendors, or you think about even batch or production orders in the future here, having a status and insight in terms of what that vendor is or who they are to you in that relationship, as opposed to clicking in 15 different places to get that information, is a really powerful tool for end users. So as an example here, I have summary by Copilot that's being harnessed here as part of this, and we can see the summary of how many purchase orders have been received recently and how many have been invoiced, what the total outstanding balance is. So let's pretend that I ran an MRP run and it generated a bunch of purchase orders. Well, if I had as part of my business process to check on the vendor, well, I could see, for example, that they have overdue invoices that I may then want to have a conversation around when I do that confirmation process then for a purchase order. And I highlight the summarization because it's one of the easiest ways to use large language models inside of business systems. Now, the other thing I want to go off of a little bit further in terms of the standard capabilities is beyond then some of these summaries, meaning how do we feed, for example, AI or Copilot in the Microsoft realm, the ability to look at data and then find a pattern related to it, but use that pattern in an intelligent way. Because remember, this isn't something that's doing complex math, it's looking basically for the next word. I've always related it right now as a word calculator, where it's trying to figure out the next word to put as part of that response when you prompt it. Well, one of those areas that's really powerful, if we go back into our finance and operations area here, is, for example, this confirmed purchase orders with changes, which many manufacturers and even distributors would use inside of their environment. When I click on this particular workspace as an example, what's happening is that Copilot is actually taking data to identify, well, what are the purchase orders that have changed, for example, in our environment? And of those purchase orders, because we know that that purchase order is fulfilling maybe safety stock or maybe production or maybe even, for example, some transfer that we have. what I can do is I can view, for example, those high impact changes by clicking on the show action here. And what the system is doing is it's identifying that on this particular purchase order, we originally ordered 1,163 of these crossover cables. And basically, we had a change that brought not only the quantity down, but also basically the delivery date that's expected for this. And the key thing here is that I can now see from an AI perspective of what actual production orders and even safety stock was impacted by that change. Because inside of Dynamics, we're using that pegging concept to basically align inventory and quantities related to it. And the cool thing about it is that I can still then use the same basic features that you would expect inside of Dynamics to see, for example, that the safety stock and then all these different types of purchase orders are really going to fulfill then those particular product quantities. And if I want to go and look at the actual production orders as well, I can highlight that particular production order, view the details that are related to it, and then look at my bill of material to then see, for example, those crossover cables and then the quantity that is actually being satisfied and then what it's been pegged against, which in this situation is a purchase order. So these are native capabilities that we're starting to see introduced just into Dynamics 365, really as we go through these different processes. Now, I don't want to stop there, Eric. I actually want to continue here and I want to go into
Yeah.
one other area just really quickly here as well, which is we don't have to stop just inside of finance and supply chain, right, as part of this. Not only do we have the ability to use Copilot from a manufacturing perspective inside of what we would classify as our ERP app, but we also have the ability to use what we call Dataverse or model-driven apps that then look at the Dynamics data to then create a much more interactive experience then for an end user. And the one I like to show with that, as Eric had mentioned before, is this demand planning based capability. Now, I want to just be really candid with you. Like Eric said, you're not going to use generative AI typically to go through and do calculations to figure out, well, am I using ARIMA, like auto regression integrated moving average, or am I using a profit model to figure out what quantities I should do or order for that matter, or even produce? That's a concept that we call time series regression, and that's typically what we call a machine learning based capability. And we can get into the details, or we will get into the details, obviously, through some of these other sessions that we're doing. But more important here is to understand the concept of where generative AI can actually help then even with the demand planning process. So as an example here, I've got a forecast model comparison in our brand new demand planning solution. And what's really cool about this is that Copilot has been integrated into this story as well. I can see, for example, two different models that were used to calculate inventory quantities. So that way, for example, if I use my ARIMA model, well, I would typically buy, order, or produce to the blue line. Whereas if I'm using a profit model, which ironically was actually created by Facebook, it would actually then use, for example, the red line that's inside of here. Now, here's where Copilot can assist then from a large language model or a generative AI capability. I want to know what changed from here to here, right? It's not something where I'm calculating the future or predicting it. I've got data that I can use to have a machine do a comparison to tell me then those differences. So as an example here, when I click on this particular value, I can see then the shifts from June to July by clicking on it. And what Copilot will do is it will take that data set from those 2 months, send it to a large language model, tell me then what those largest shifts are, so that way I can actually then fine tune potentially the quantities that are needed. I can even, for example, take this data and put it into a table format to see those differences to even potentially export this. So these are areas like we see inside of the base enablement of the product that really add a lot of depth and automation then into the environment to make it easier for you to be able to identify exceptions, because if it's working, typically you don't want to focus on that. You want to focus on areas that are going against the process or that need more detail or more background. And once again, this is where Copilot and that generative AI capability really comes into play, where it can help then identify those differences, but it's not going to be something, once again, that calculates your demand plan, right? So I guess, Eric, with that, one of the areas that you may want to start talking through is how do we start getting more into this, right, as part of that AI enablement?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I know Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, recently had a presentation on some of the future of Copilot, and he started talking about Copilot or AI as the new user interface. And I do think you're going to start to see such key advantages in the user interface with this Copilot and AI capability. And just showing what you showed there, I mean, it's pretty cool how you can see now, you can drill into so much more information than you had before within the application. So
Absolutely.
it's pretty cool, and there's just going to be more and more to come. So Scott said, like, how do you get started with Copilot? Like, how do you get going? What are your next steps to do this? And so the first thing is you can just start using the capability. So you can just go to copilot.microsoft.com, start typing in searches that you have there, and you will be able to use the web version of it at no cost. And then you can do more with that as well too. So if you've deployed Copilot internally using enterprise search, you can actually use a work tab on there to be able to search within your content that you have within your organization. But there are a number of different Copilot for products that are out there. So Copilot for Microsoft 365 is what I would recommend you start with. And that gives you a lot of this capability, like the ability to record Teams meetings and be able to summarize them and give actions and keep track of transcripts, the ability to create PowerPoints, draft with Copilot. One of the cool new features is going to be this ability to prioritize your inbox based on what it knows about you to make sure that the right emails get to the top of your list. And then you've got Copilot for Sales, Copilot for Service, and Copilot Studio. So Copilot for Sales to enable your salespeople to do a lot of their interactions in Teams and Outlook and have that reflect into your CRM system. So that's something that we've got an offering for that if you're interested, we'd love to talk more about. Copilot for Service is really about being able to solve problems more quickly using bots and using AI to be able to route cases more effectively, to be able to give answers based on knowledge base and case history. And then Scott's going to show Copilot Studio, which is really the customization engine for Copilot here going forward. So all of these things sound like big and scary, but they are actually something that you can implement relatively quickly, that are not going to require significant amounts of time and investment. And the power of these products will really pay off for you in terms of efficiency within your business. So we'd love to talk to you more about some of these capabilities and where you can go from there. And then you can find Copilot in all of the products. So Scott showed an example of where it is in finance and operations, but Power BI, Power Automate, if you haven't used Power Automate yet, the ability to create triggering and events, workflows, things like that. The Copilot capabilities made it really easy to use now. So I definitely recommend that you check that out. But in our last few minutes here, let's have Scott show you a little bit about Copilot Studio and what that can do for you and how that fits into this conversational AI.
All right, let's go ahead and Eric, we'll just frame this just really quickly for the audience. Basically, what I'm going to do is we're going to jump into Copilot Studio. We've got some slides that you'll be able to look at later as well, but I guess I just want to get to the core content here just really quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and present my screen again, and then what we should be able to do here is just really quickly go through a couple of examples that we can use for extension here. So as I do this, I'm going to go ahead and flip over once again my presentation so everyone can see it. There we go. So the first and foremost thing to note is that all of this I created within 5 minutes. So like I said, if you want to spend more time on this, you can go even further. So as an example, within Copilot now, remember the sidecar experience that pops out allows us to basically go through and then add additional capabilities to Copilot to address specific business needs. So I'm just going to go through a couple of them just to kind of show you and get the creative juices going in terms of what you can do with Copilot so you can really kind of understand what those capabilities are. So with that as an example here, I may, for example, need to get some information about a grower if I'm in the retail or ag retail portion of this, right? So to do that, what I may do is I may go to all customers as an example, click on a customer that is actually one of these particular growers inside of our environment. And I may ask, for example, to summarize a grower as an example, right? And so you can see here that this is actually custom Copilot capability that we've added, where basically I'm saying take this particular grower detail, take the content of the record around that grower, and then bring it basically to Copilot Studio to basically go through and then summarize, for example, that particular record. So we can see here in the background that it's actually working on some summarization that's occurring. And what we should see here in just a second is basically those details that then allow us basically to really then state some of the attributes about that particular customer or grower inside of the environment. So you can see here it identifies who the email is, the account number. We can see, for example, what region we're in, right? So we can actually tailor then these responses. And the cool thing about this is that you can then integrate this into the M365 Copilot. But we can also do things like create an alert for this grower, right? Or something of that nature. Would you like to create an alert for this record? Yes, I would as part of this. And I'd like to have it, for example, whenever the account number gets updated as part of it. So we can see here an alert has been created, and we can verify that by going ahead and then clicking on our options inside of here, clicking on our manage alerts inside of the system, and you can see now that I have an alert that was created so that with any change to the account number field inside of here, that it's going to email me with that particular alert or change, right? So these are kind of cool to start. Let's go a little bit further with this. Let's go to a point where we want to automate, for example, the generation of a particular order inside of our system. So as an example here, I'm going to pretend that I got an order from somebody that is basically saying what they'd want to buy, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that into this automated order create folder that I created. And what we're going to see here in the background is that there's actually a Power Automate that I set up that's actually watching, for example, that particular folder to see if there's any email that gets dropped inside of it. And as that email gets dropped inside of here, what we're eventually going to see is that the system is actually going to pick that up and it's going to start processing that from a Power Automate perspective. Now, there's a couple things to note here as I'm kind of clicking through this to refresh it. First and foremost is the fact that when we use this automation inside of here, we have to remember that when we're doing particular events that it's what we call asynchronous, which means inside of a system, we're going to have something happen, and then the system's going to start processing it in the background. And as with any demo, especially on a keynote, we're always going to have something that's going to be a little bit of a delay, but just to prove it, we can see that it is now running as we go through this process. So what's happening here is I'll show just really quickly what the Power Automate does as it goes through the process. Basically, without writing a single line of code, I told our Power Automate to basically monitor a particular email, grab some currency details, generate text by using a prompt where I'm identifying the sender and products by passing in the email body and the address that that was from. And what's happening in the background is that there's an AI prompt, if I go ahead and click on it, that is basically taking that content and saying, hey, the following email has content and it has a customer and product that need to be identified, and I pass that in, but I also then pass dynamics data into the prompt and ask for it then to generate a response for it. And what you heard in the background here was the fact that when that occurs, an order was actually generated inside of Dynamics 365 here. You can see that it responded with it at 4:02. And if I go into my orders now inside of the system, what I can do is I can show that order, and we can see that it created an AI generated order. And if I double click on this particular order product, as we call it, we can see that there are two HDMI cables that are inside of here for $20 each that it generated as part of that process. So the reason I'm really highlighting this is the fact that if you think about longer term here on how you may want to incorporate some of this automation, you could have it where it's monitoring an inbox that then tries to create an order or tries to create a load or scale ticket. And you can have it then as well where that if it's confident enough that it will process through, whereas if it fails, you can have some type of notification event that can occur. But a key thing here that I just want to note is that I didn't have to spend any time writing any code for it. I just created that automate, created that prompt, passed the email to it, and then from there, it went through and then generated this order inside of the system. So once again, really cool capabilities, beyond cool, can be very assistive, and we have many customers that are using these types of technologies now to start driving, obviously, some of that automation inside of their environment.